All right, guys. So I had a couple of requests around this related to setting up iOverlay with OpenKneeboard and iRacing specifically, and how I got it to work. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit around a couple of the things that I did to make it work, to get it kind of set up and going, and I'll do as quick as I can as sort of a tutorial on how I made this sort of work. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to walk through the steps to how you go download iOverlay or how you download OpenKneeboard. The links I'll leave in the description so you know where to go find those things and have them installed. But basically, you just install them, right? So iOverlay will be installed. Once you click on it and it's running, it'll be up on your screen just like what you see behind you right there. And the same thing will be true with OpenKneeboard. Once that comes up, you'll see the same thing on here as well. So I'm going to minimize this for just a second, take this down. So we're going to just focus on iOverlay for just a second. So first of all, when you think about what we're doing here, you've got a couple of things that you want to do. One is that these overlays up here in this top section, once it comes up and it loads up, these don't seem to work for me anyways with OpenKneeboard. So none of these things under overlays from general down to Twitch chat work with OpenKneeboard in the overlays section. What you need to do is you need to use the streaming sections down here, which are sort of a duplicate of what's up here for the most part. There's a couple of things that are missing, but most of the stuff that's really useful and important will be down here. So you're just going to use this section down here. Don't worry about this stuff up here at all, really, except for maybe the general tab if you want to mess around with how thick you want the lines or the type of font you want to use and stuff like that. That's the only tab up here under overlays that'll help you. Otherwise, you're going to be focusing all your stuff down here under the streaming section. Okay, so that's rule number one with this, at least from my perspective, what I've been able to do. The other thing that you're going to want to do is be thinking about this. Right now it's set as default to no preview or live. Change this to race preview. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up an example for us to look at. So later on, as we're adjusting it in OpenKneeboard, we're going to see an example pulled up for us to adjust with all of its glory, and we'll be able to add some different things as we do that as we go. So race preview will give you kind of a preview as we do that. So that's kind of where we're sitting at there. So turn that to race preview, and then just remember you're only using the streaming section down here to do the overlays with OpenKneeboard. Okay, so that's going there. So then you're going to have OpenKneeboard pulled up. And when you pull up your OpenKneeboard, you're going to have a bunch of settings over here and a bunch of tabs, I guess, on the left-hand side for things for DCS, for example, and some templated overlays kind of already pre-built. You're not going to use any of those, but those are some examples of what you could do more or less. So I've cleared those out so you don't see those on mine right now, but basically that's where you're going to see those. The first thing that you're going to do, though, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new profile real quick instead of the default. So I'm just going to say example 2, and I'm going to hit create, and then I'm going to be pulling this up right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these real quick. And so just so we're starting off clear, so go to the tabs and I'm going to delete these out, and we're going to start all over here for each one. Tabs out, S. Okay, and so under so you're going to have those samples up there for you to use. What you're going to do, though, is basically what I would do is you could create a new profile, just what I did there. Under here, you can go to your under default, it'll have a bunch of ones there. You can leave those if you want to and delete them later, and just add new tabs. So for this example, though, we're going to create a new profile where we have different tabs down here as well, and that could be useful later on depending if you want different overlays up for different cars. So your profile name, for example, could be a GT3 car, or it could be a F1 car, whatever, because maybe you want to see some different types of overlays, or you may want to have them in different positions depending on the car that you're driving, because once you set up where you want it to be in your VR space, different cars. You might want to adjust it to be higher, lower, left and right. So you can set these up for different cars, and then that way they're always kind of lined up with where you want, so they're not sitting in the middle of your windscreen depending on the car that you're driving and whatnot. So anyway, there's some use cases for having different profiles on there as well. So in this case, we've got a new profile set up here. For some of you, like I said, you're going to see a bunch of DCS stuff or some more flight simulator type stuff on there, and you can just add tabs to that, or you can just create a new profile and pull up something new altogether. What I did originally was just added tabs, and then I went back and deleted the other tabs that were in there that I wasn't going to use for DCS and whatnot. So basically, we've got a new no tabs over here that we're going to use, and we're going to be able to add a tab here in just a second. So before we do that, though, we're going to go back over to here, and we're going to figure out which one of these streaming ones we want to have. So we might want to say we want to have standings up, or we want relatives, fuel calculator, whatever, right? So when I click on them, it kind of brings me back up to the top here. So that's why I can't keep scrolling up there. But anyway, so let's say what we want to do is add standings to our VR overlay. So I'm going to click on that button right here. And then what we're going to do is, you see where it says browser source URL in this section right here. We're going to copy and paste this. So we're going to Control C, and then we're going to go over here to our Kneeboard example, or our Kneeboard tab that we've created. We're going to add a new tab. And the new tab is going to be a web dashboard right here, not a window capture. So web dashboard, and it's going to come up on here. And then we're going to paste Control C, or Control V rather, into this. We're going to add a dashboard, right? So now we've got a new tab. It's also listed right over here as well. I'm going to right click on this and rename this tab to, what do we call this? This is standings. So I'm going to put that in here like that, and I'm going to rename. And it won't change right away for some reason. I'm not sure why, but if I go out of it and I go back in, it'll be there. It'll say standings again. So it'll be there. So anyway, so it doesn't change right away. It's kind of a glitch, but anyway, it's there. So it'll say standings. And now we've got our first URL that's tied to this right here. So we basically have a Kneeboard, if you will, or an overlay, another word for an overlay, that's sort of ready to go. That's going to be based on this, okay? So if I click on it from there, it's going to be pulling up that example that I had over here when I said race preview. So if I don't have it on race preview, it's going to look like this. It's not going to look like there's anything there when I click on the standings here. So I want to have a race preview so that something is pulled up so I can see it. And this will just be kind of an example, right? So that's what you're seeing right here. And what you're doing at this point is basically, you can go back down over here in the iOverlay settings, and it's clicked over here, and then I can choose which content I want to have on there through these different headers that are on here as well. So if I click content, these are all the things that I can turn on if I want to, and have them spread across my overlay and see as much information as I care to see, and in what context, whether it's a race, qualifying, practice, whatever that I want to see it in. Okay, so if I turn off this, for example, if I turn off the position, you can see in real time the position goes off over here. If I turn off the car number, maybe I don't care about that information, I can turn that on and off. The driver's name, I don't necessarily, if I need to see that or not, I can adjust all those things, and you'll see that it's changing it in real time. Okay, so that's what that's about. So you can go through here and click on these settings and adjust different things as well for each one of these. The driver name, if I go into settings, it'll tell you how big you can make the name. So if I wanted the name to be, if I wanted to see more of the name, I can kind of adjust this width up and get more of their last name loaded in there, and it'll make the columns wider and stuff like that. And I click done, and anyway, so I can kind of preview what it's going to look like right into here as I go through the content. Class header right here, that's this line just below this other line here. So this top line here is really the header way up here at the top, and the one below that is the class header, this little space right in this area right here. So if I turn on the strength of field right here, you can see, for example, it adds that 3.0K. Turn it off here, and I can see to do that. I can also turn on drivers in the class, how many people are in this class. So it's got all 64 drivers in one class. That's why it shows it that way. And then I can have the class name, GT3. So I could say, GT3 drivers, or 64 of them in our little preview example, and the average rating in the preview example is 3.0 iRating. Okay, so if I wanted to have that section on with that information, I can put that in there. Under header, I can click on this right here and have the time remaining, the track temperature, strength of field, session name, you know, all that stuff. So you can see that there's a lot of duplication, like you've got strength of field down here and up here, so maybe I don't want it up here. You can see where that goes away. Maybe I want to have the, I don't know, the in-sim time, 24-hour clock, the in-sim time tells you it's 3 o'clock. Or I might want to have the air temperature, or I might want to have laps remaining. You know, it just kind of depends on what sort of content you want to have in here. So this just allows you to adjust and modify and put as much information as you want to have or not need to have before you go up into it, right? So this is just for the standing. So you can set all this stuff up in your preview window before we pop into the VR environment and start to manipulate where the window is going to go. Okay, so again, the way I did that was go into race preview over here. If I turn it off, I won't be able to see those things. So race preview allows me to see what I have set and ready to go. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So just to review real quick, here's what we did. Don't use the overlays, use the streaming. When you click on the settings, you're going to have a URL. That's what's going to link it over to your OpenKneeboard. When you go into settings, you're going to add a tab, you're going to add a web tab, and then you're going to copy and paste that URL into the web tab, and that's going to bring this over. Once I click on it over here, you're going to be able to see that as long as the race preview is on. Okay, so now that we have that into there, now it's in OpenKneeboard, but now we got to put it into a context of VR and whatnot, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second. So I'm going to move this over here to the middle of the screen for a second and show you a little bit around what this would sort of look like on here. So now that we've got it here, I need to put it into VR specifically. So I'm going to go to settings, and then I'm going to go to the virtual reality tab here at the top, and I'm going to click that, and then that's going to pull this up, this menu up right here. Now what this is, think of Kneeboard 1, or there'll be Kneeboard 2, 3, 4, however many Kneeboards you want. Just think of those as another word for overlay. That's all that it means, right? So Kneeboard 1 is the same thing as like your overlay, overlay 1. And what it's basically saying is do you want it on or not? And that's important because there could be some situations where I don't want to see certain settings. You know, I might load 4 different tabs and decide there's too much information on the screen, so I leave them on there, but I turn off individual Kneeboards or individual overlays because I only want to see 2 things versus 4 things or whatever. So you can turn off each of those independently if you want to once we get down here where it says enabled in VR. But anyways, the OpenXR support is enabled. I'm using OpenXR in iRacing. So when I started iRacing, I started in OpenXR. I don't use OpenVR or you know, Oculus or anything like that. I use OpenXR, and so as far as I know, this is the only way I know how to do it is with OpenXR. If you have a Quest 3 or Quest Pro or Quest 2 or whatever, you can use OpenXR as well. So I'd recommend OpenXR. It generally gives you better performance than Steam does, or OpenVR, or even the Quest settings. So OpenXR is kind of the by far the favored way of kind of going about this. Gives you some more things, but it should work either way. But OpenXR is enabled by default, and then we've got enabled in VR down here, so we're going to be able to see it in our headset. The kind we want is independent, and they're all going to be independent by the time we get this done, so you can move the individual windows down around separately. And then the default tab here, what you would do is change this to whatever the tab is that you want this first overlay to be tied to. So by default, it's going to say, hey, whatever the automatic tab is, right? So, but automatic, there could be 4 tabs over here. So I want to make sure it's tying it to the right one. So instead of automatic, I'm going to say, no, I wanted to tie it to standing. So I want my first Kneeboard to be tied to the first tab that I created over here. So that standings has standings. And when we add another tab here in a minute, you'll see where it kind of starts to make more sense. So then you're going to have other things that we're going to be able to set up in the VR environment, how big and small it is, you know, kind of height and distance forward, back. Got to be thinking like 3D space when we do it. This recenter now button, we're going to go through it and do that real quick now and recenter it as well, because that'll, once we recenter it, we'll be able to change how where it is in our VR space, up, down, left, right, forward, back, pitch and roll and yaw, so that it kind of looks clean and looks neat in our environment. And then you know, your header, footer, bookmarks are visible. We're going to come back to that here in a second because you can turn those on and off. This gaze target size, I would turn it off. What this basically does is when I turn my VR headset and I look towards this overlay that I have, it'll make it bigger, and then when I look away, it'll go back to smaller. So for some people, maybe that's a thing you would want. For me, I just kind of want to stay in its place, and when I look around at it with my eyes or whatever, I don't need to look at it and all of a sudden it gets really big on my screen or whatnot. So turn off the gaze zoom button so it doesn't zoom in and out, and then you don't have to really worry about this other stuff. So that's what that's about. So I turn that off, and then we're good to go. Now the only other thing we need to do is bind the centering button so it centers the overlays within my headset. So when you first start it up there, your overlays may be off to the side or wherever by default because it doesn't know where your VR is in space. Kind of like when you start iRacing, when you start it up and you first sit in your cockpit, you press a reset button. Mine's bound to button 2 or the A button on my driving wheel so that everything's centered. And my recommendation would be to do the same thing. You're going to bind it to the same button that you use to recenter your headset in VR normally, right? So in order to do that, we need to go bind it. So I'm going to go back to the settings key here, and I'm going to go to input and control right here. And it's going to bring up all of your devices that you have connected. So in this case, I've got my Fanatec wheel, keyboard, you can bind to that. You can even bind it to your pedals or whatever other controllers you might have. So in my case, what I've done is I've bound it, the recenter VR button right here to button number 2, which is the A key on my McLaren GT3 wheel here. So that's the same button that I use to recenter the headset in the iRacing environment as well. So when I recenter it in iRacing, it's also going to recenter it in OpenKneeboard as well. So that's already bound. You click on that, press the button, and then that's all you got to do. Once that's set, go back to your settings, go back into virtual reality, and then you're ready to kind of continue on. So now we're in this section right here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up the VR environment here as well. So I'm going to bring this up on the screen so you can kind of see that here. And I'm going to show you a little bit around what it's going to kind of look like on this as well. So let me kind of jump into here and show you a little bit around what's going on here. So I'm going to hold up my headset and turn this back on to get it refreshed on here as well. Okay, and if I look around in my VR headset, and what I've done here basically is I started a game, I started a session, and then I just hit escape, so I'm kind of back out at a replay mode so that I can just see from my cockpit view, so that way I can, the engine's not running or anything like that, and I can just kind of sit here and mess with it. But if I looked way down to the right, I don't know where it is exactly in space right here. I don't know if I can see it or not. Let's see. Yeah, it's right there in the middle of your screen. Really small, really far away. You can barely hardly see it, and I can't really make this full screen and kind of show you everything else. So, but it's right there in the middle. You can kind of see it way out into the distance. There's a standings thing. So I need to move it around and get it up to where I need it to be. Kind of see it over the arm of the person right there as well. So in order to do that, I need to have access to these keys over here to be able to do that, right? And so you can see none of these are highlighted yet, and it won't be highlighted until I'm in this menu and I recenter it with it on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this headset on, and I'm going to press the button that I was binded to recenter the display. So I'm going to sit there, and in iRacing, you know, it's recentering my display. And then when I look down again, you can kind of see it's right there in the middle. And then what you can also see is this has now become highlighted over here. So now I can adjust these things. Well, obviously it's way down there sitting on my leg, so that's not where I want it. So I can use these buttons up and down, and you can see how this is going to move it. I'm going to move it all the way up. And it's easier if you're in your VR headset here. You can kind of see what it looks like on there as well. And then I'm going to move it sort of approximate to where I want it to go. Now you'll see it's tilted here in a little bit of a weird angle, and so that's the pitch. So we're going to adjust the pitch a little bit here and get the pitch to be more or less where we think it's going to be. And again, I'll kind of keep toggling back and through my headset here. And this is again why it's important to have make sure that you have the race preview on so you can see it, because if I didn't have the preview on, there wouldn't be any data to populate in there other than my name, and it would make it really hard to see where it's at. So I can see the screen on there as well. Now there's a couple of things I can tell you. It's closer to me in space than my dashboard would be, so I know I'm going to have to move it away from me, right? So I'm going to move it forward or back. So I'm going to move this back a little bit so it's out in the distance, and it's sort of centered out there where approximately, let's say where maybe my dashboard is at, right? So it's about the same distance in 3D space from what I'm seeing right here, though it's really off too far to the right. So I'm kind of tilting my head up, looking at where my keyboard is here, and I'm going to use it. And people that have done a lot of VR, they know that they know this look that I'm making right now. This is kind of what you end up doing half the time, right? You're doing this kind of shit. So anyway, so you move this around, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go left and right position here, and I'm going to click the right button, whatever it is. One of them will move them one way, one will be the other. They don't always make total sense. But I'm moving this in one direction or another using the little arrows that you can see on the screen over here to get it basically where I want it to go. Maybe I want it to go down a little bit, so I'm going to move it down, which I guess is the other way, and I move it down, and let's say that I want it right about here, and it's getting kind of closer to where in my VR space I can kind of see it. So hopefully that's kind of making sense on your screen now as well. And then the other thing too, I've got the headers and stuff on there as well. So if I want to turn those off, if I scroll down a little bit, that's where this little button is right here, and you can turn that off, and you can see that the headers disappeared. So now here's where the header's on, here's where the header's off. You can kind of see what that looks like. So the headers are going to be off, and I'm going to move it a little bit more to the right and get it sort of right there. Now kind of from this now, it looks like it might be a little bit too far back, so I want to move it a little bit closer, and a little closer, I guess, and do something like that. Okay, and then if I wanted to tilt it a little bit, like in towards me, then that's where you can use the yaw, and you can kind of make it kind of tilt in just a little bit. And you may not be able to see it on the screen, but you can see how I'm like tilting this, and I can get it kind of just the way that I want. Same thing with the roll. You can roll it, kind of give it a different sort of angle depending on where it is in your view space. And then you're getting pretty close to where we might want it to be. And then if I scroll back up over here in the OpenKneeboard example, then I've got this Kneeboard size, and this is where you can make it bigger or smaller. So if I want it to be a little bit bigger, you can see how it's getting nice and big, all the way up to that big on the screen. So you can see, and in VR, it's pretty big, right? So that's what it looks like. So maybe that's a little bit, I want it to be smaller, so I'm going to move it back out. And then, maybe I want to continue to adjust it and get it exactly, where I might want it to be vertically, horizontally, and maybe that's someplace, pretty close. I guess something like that, maybe, right? So that's maybe where I want to have my standings at, and I can see the information on there as well. Okay, so that's what that might look like on there, and I kind of keep tinkering with it until I get it about the exact place that I want it to be at. So that's how you would do that. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes some sense in that one right there. So I'm going to set this down for just a second, and then what I'm going to do here is we're going to add another one so you kind of see what that will look like as well. So let me turn off the mirror here on that, and I'm going to pull this back over to here, and this is pretty much done. That's all you need to do. Okay, so that's all you do. Now all you're going to do is duplicate this, and what we're going to do to duplicate it is we're going to move this off to the side. We're going to go back to iOverlay. We're going to scroll down to the streaming settings, and now let's say that we want to have the relative be on there as well. So the same kind of thing that we did before, we're going to go over here to relative, and then what we're going to do, hopefully you can see that down there. Okay, so we're going to go over here to relative, and then there's your source URL. We're going to highlight this, and we're going to copy and paste this over to here, or we're going to copy and paste it. We're going to go under settings over here under the Kneeboard program. We're going to add a new tab, and we're going to add a new tab and a new web dashboard, and we're going to copy and paste that into that. So now we have a new one, and this new dashboard needs to have a name to it. So again, I'm going to rename this one to relatives, just like that. And I'm going to hit rename, and again, kind of a bug in the deal where it won't change the name initially right up here, but it will change. I can switch it back to my default and then back to my example here, and you'll see that now it updates. Don't ask me why, but that's how it happens, right? So anyway, so now the relatives is up there, and again, that's why now I can see it, And if I click standings, I can see that. Relatives, I can see that. So again, same kind of deal before. And if I go back over to iOverlay, again, under relative here, I can switch on all of these different things that I might want to have in this particular window, including, you know, the track temperature, or just however, whatever information you want to have is, you know, whatever you want to do, right? So I'm going to leave this for right now and just kind of have that on there just so you kind of see what that sort of looks like. So now we have two tabs over here. So now I'm going to go back to settings, and I'm going to go to virtual reality, and it's going to pull back up that we're right where I was. And remember, we did Kneeboard 1, which was overlay 1. That included the standings, which we made set up here in our VR space over here, right? So now I want to click this plus button right here, and I'm going to make this, going to come up with an add view, which is what I'm going to do is add another overlay, and I want to make this an independent, and I'm going to hit add, right? And the reason why is because I want to move these independent of each other. Otherwise, if they're tied to each other, when I move one, they both will move together. So you want maybe one over here, so you want these to be independent. Then under the default tab, instead of automatic, this one's going to be the other tab. It's going to be relatives, right? So Kneeboard 1 is tied to standings, and Kneeboard 2 is tied to relatives. Those are the ones that we created over here. So then, same thing comes up here. We don't have to recenter the bindings because we've already done that with the keys, so that's already done. And then we're going to turn off gaze zoom because we don't want to look at it and it get bigger. We're going to turn off the header because we're not going to need that. And then we're good to go. So to recenter this one, again, these things aren't going to be highlighted until I put on my VR headset. And I do the same thing with this one that I did before. So back to the VR headset. We're going to pull this up, and I'm going to put this on so it's visible. I'm going to press the button that I used to recenter everything. And now I see the original overlay that I did before for standings. And then someplace way down there in the wrong spot is my relatives, right? So I know I'm going to kind of go back over here, and I'm going to have to move this up. I'm going to have to go up in the vertical distance here, figure out which one of these is going to make it go up. And then you're going to see it's moving up on the screen, and there it comes. Now it's all tilted kind of weird, so we know that that's the pitch. So we're going to adjust the pitch in a way that I can see it. And then it looks like it's too close, so I need to move it back. So I'm going to move it back quite a bit, and then I'm going to move it to the right, or the other right, I guess. And then, you know, then I'm going to go down a little bit because maybe I want it to go right about there, something like that, because maybe I want it to fill up that little box right there. You can see that hopefully on your screen. And then, yeah, I think we're pretty good. Maybe a little bit more forward so it looks like it's more lined out with that screen as best that we can. And then I want to make it a little bit bigger, so I scroll up here to size, and then I can make it a little bit bigger. And as that fills the screen, then I might have to adjust that to the right and to the left. Something like that maybe, right? And then I can adjust even the pitch and the roll and all that kind of stuff. And I can keep doing this over and over and over again until it's all done. So now if I were to go from here and then jump into a race setting, I can jump in and I can click test, and you can see that the overlays are there. So I've got my iRacing overlay is up there, as well as the other overlays that I've created. You can kind of see what that sort of looks like on there as well. And then I can turn on and off different things depending on what I want it to do. So that's that, and I can move everything around in iRacing the way I normally would. Those things will just permanently stay there and say static on there as well. So I'm going to hop out of this for a second, and they kind of stay there. Now, the other thing too is they stay there because I've got the button set to stay on when I'm outside of the car, and that's back over here to iOverlay. So I'm going to pull this back over to here and turn this off for a second. So we don't see that. And then what you're seeing over here is when I go down again to my standings in general, you can see where they're on in-car, out-of-car, and all that kind of stuff. So that's where those things would be on and off inside of the car. And then when you restart iRacing, it should take effect, and they shouldn't be there anymore when they're on there. So, yeah. Yeah. So once I restart this again, it'll take it and it won't be there anymore anyways. And those things won't be there when you're outside of the car. All right. So then that's where that stuff will come into play in case you do want to have them on inside or outside of the car. Okay. So that's those things right there. And then one final reminder is don't forget that when you do go race, you want to jump in and go back to live right here. Otherwise, you're going to see just an example instead of the real live session. So I switched it back to live when I jump back into the game. And we come back in right here and we hit test. Now you can see on your screen that there's not much data because it's just me on the track in this test session. I'm the only one that's over here in this little section over here with my relatives, and then on the left side, until I go through a lap, you won't see any information over here, and then even if you do, it's only going to be one line of information for me. So there's not much here that you're going to see when you're just practicing by yourself, but you kind of get an example of why that would be sort of important, right? So I'm going to get out of this and end that part right there and put this back down. And so that's basically it, guys. So those are some of the tips and tricks that that I think should be helpful. Hopefully it kind of works out for you. And you know, if you have any questions, shoot me a note and let me know. And maybe if somebody's got a better way of doing something, let me know that too. But pretty straightforward. It does take a little bit of time to kind of get it all sorted and kind of click on some things and learn about some stuff, especially iOverlay. There's a lot of stuff you can go through on here. There's a crazy amount of content and stuff that you can kind of go through and play around with what that stuff's going to look like. And remember, when you want to look at it, you know, setting it up and then kind of seeing what those previews will look like over here in OpenKneeboard will help you really determine, hey, is that all the information that I want to see? And you can set all that stuff up with these different tabs and stuff like that. So you can add a couple of, you could add a tab if you wanted to that just said, you know, testing or just viewing different things within it, just to kind of see what it's going to kind of look like, right? So that's a way of doing it. The other thing that you could do too is you could also use the ones that don't work as well up here to kind of see what they're going to look like before you use the other ones that you will work. But I found that these were confusing because I didn't want to use these up here for the overlays that way. I wanted to use this, essentially the streaming overlays, right? So my advice for those folks in iOverlay is say streaming overlays versus overlays, right? So overlays, like flat screen overlays, streaming overlays. Just my 2 cents for whatever that's worth, right? So it might make it easier for people to understand what's kind of happening there. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. If you like it, let me know. And yeah, if you want to see anything else on this kind of stuff, let me know on that as well. And appreciate it. All right, we'll talk to you guys later.